everybody. I'm Marv Albin along with Matt Gukas and Bill Walton. Now, the big story here tonight, the story concerning Michael Jordan's physical conditions. This Jordan arriving about 2 hours ago. He is suffering from flu-like symptoms. Made his way onto the court just moments ago, and as you see right here, looking a bit shaky. He was up all last night, spent all day in bed, did not eat at all, did not go to the shoot-around earlier today, did not practice, so his status is uncertain.
At 3:30 this morning, Michael Jordan woke up with flu-like symptoms. He had a stomach ache and a headache, and he couldn't go back to sleep. He threw up all night, and as reported earlier, he missed the shoot-around, but he was in bed all day and continued to throw up. As a matter of fact, he got in here early. When I went to talk to him back in the back room, he was in a dark room trying to get some rest, but still throwing up. And Marv, I talked to him, I said, how do you feel? He said, I really feel horrible. But his history in games where he's either been hurt or sick has been bad news for the opponent. And as you can see, he's ready to go tonight.
You are very welcome to the Classic Game Club here on OTB AM. We're going all the way back to Game 5 of the 1997 NBA Finals. It's Chicago's 90 points to 88 win against the Utah Jazz. Utah's first appearance in the NBA Finals. Michael Jordan popping up with a casual 38 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals and 1 block and 1 unbelievable dose of the flu. Kieran Donaghy, Ronan, Mullen, you're very welcome.
Oh, and how are things?
Very well. Lads, this was pretty enjoyable to watch back, I must say. The flu game, as it's known wider. Is that that's a Jordan T-shirt you've got on there, Kieran? So I presume this brings back very fond memories for you.
Yeah, I know. I actually watched 2 games in the lead up to this, the flu game that you sent me, and for last night, for some reason, I watched his final game. So it just sums him up really about how dogged he was. And yeah, as Ahmad Rashad just said there, I think that's Ahmad Rashad anyway. I think he just said like that when Jordan was sick or he had the flu, or if there was any bit of doubt about him, he seemed to be able to refocus and become even better, which a lot of people will play into the excuse, and they have an excuse there, and if it doesn't happen, it's fine. He almost wanted to go the other way with it. He wanted the excuse, and he still wanted to prove everybody that he was the best.
Like, are you a big Bulls fan at this point in the late 90s? Are you following all these things as they happen? Obviously, it's tougher to follow US sports in the 90s as opposed to now when we can get everything on Instagram every single morning.
Yeah, I was Sky Sport. I don't know who. I remember watching him in a friend of mine's house, James Friel. Whatever package of channels he had, I think it might have been on BBC or Channel 4 or one of those. But yeah, I remember staying in his house, having sleepovers as a probably 97. Yeah, I was about 14, so just kind of having sleepovers, but having sleepovers in the fella's house had it all the channels. So there was a few of us there. Watching the game and watching the game, because Jordan was at 14. Jordan to me was everything. So I was going to figure out a way to see it, even if it was hard to watch it live them times in Ireland. But yeah, I watched most of those games.
Ronan, this is actually your shout to go back and watch this game. Of course, we're going to be doing a lot of Michael Jordan content over the next 5 weeks or so with the documentary on ESPN. When you hear the flu game, what is it for you? Are you in the same boat as me where it's like nostalgic and you almost become more aware of it the older you get?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this very famous commentary clip that Stuart Scott did on SportsCenter, and it does the rounds a lot, and it kind of glorified the whole game in my mind. And it wasn't until this occasion where I fully watched the whole thing back. And it's just amazing. And to denote it as the flu game is remarkable in itself, because like Marv Albert basically came out at the start of this broadcast and said, Michael Jordan has the flu. And everyone was like, grand. If Marv Albert said that, it must be true. So like, it's like Gabe Byrne on the Late Late Show saying something and the whole nation just takes it as gospel. Like, who knows if he had the flu or if he had, like, there's so many conspiracies that I think his trainer, Tim Grover, said he had food poisoning. Jalen Rose back in the Grantland days was talking to Bill Simmons. He kind of insinuated that maybe Jordan was out the night before. And then like there's obviously all these other conspiracies that he wasn't sick at all and he was just trying to play mind games with the Jazz. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of all that. I think it probably was like food poisoning or something.
Yeah, like it's interesting when you look at some of these things. Like you mentioned the Tim Grover comments there. So just to go through his quotes, but what exactly he said, because I always I used to take the Tim Grover thing as gospel. I still do. Like he says, so we order a pizza, they come to deliver it, 5 guys come to deliver this pizza, first of all. And I'm just, I take the pizza and I tell them, I said, I got a bad feeling about this. I just got a bad feeling about this. Out of everybody in the room, he was the only one that ate, nobody else. Then 2 o'clock in the morning, I get a call to my room. I come to the room. He's curled up in the fetal position. We're looking at him. We're finding the team physician at that time. And immediately I said, it's food poisoning, guaranteed, not the flu. And I thought, he looks like a shell of a man. It's an incredible piece of acting, even better than Space Jam, if Michael Jordan isn't actually as sick as he says he is during this thing.
Oh, yeah. No, Jordan was sick. That's one thing for sure. Whether it's food poisoning or because the whole vomiting thing, you can't be a flu. You don't really vomit that much if you have a flu. You're just kind of curled up and you're in the bed and you've got all those symptoms. So maybe the touch of a flu and then ate something funny as well, which made him get sick. But you can see it in instances where he hits a big shot and he's coming to the bench and he's literally, he's barely able to lift his hands up to high five the subs that are trying to meet him when he comes off. You can see every time he's lift up his hand, he's like, oh yeah, just let me get down here and sit and drink. And just even the way the team were around him, the way Scotty was around him in timeouts, there was no acting job. There'd be no need for an acting job. Jordan, it wasn't like Jordan had failed in big games before and he was kind of wanting to make up an excuse for himself in case he couldn't pull the Bulls over the line. You come up with it, I'm sick, and you start telling everybody you're sick and you act like you're sick. And then if you lose and you didn't pull it off, well, you can always say, I was sick. I don't think Jordan ever needed to go to that. No. He was in 4 finals before that and won all of them. And there was no difference that this was going to be anything else.
Yeah, if there's one sports person in the history of professional sport that doesn't need to resort to this sort of thing, it's probably him. That being said, you do hear stories of other types of mind games that Michael Jordan played, but I think that's kind of more an unbelievable level of competitiveness, maybe a bit of trash talk. I think this sort of scheme is probably not in keeping with Michael Jordan, to be honest. So I'm fully buying that he's sick. I think there's enough evidence out there. And I think this actually just has real echoes of the 1995 Rugby World Cup when New Zealand allegedly get food poisoned. It's reminiscent of Tottenham Hotspur the day before the final day of the Premier League when they bottled fourth place when they all got poisoned. Of course, there are allegations that people with vested interests might have dropped dodgy food off to certain places. And I'm sure there are certain insinuations made about people in Salt Lake City who might have been Jazz fans, but I'm sure there was nothing untoward. It was just bad luck. But it's remarkable. This is probably, would you say it's the one series where the opposition actually did have a genuine chance that even a fully healthy Michael Jordan going into that arena in Salt Lake City that night, you still gave Utah a chance. You still very much put this on the tightrope. It didn't need the flu for this to become a very exciting matchup, for example. It was 2-2 after all.
Yeah, and you can kind of see, and I'm sure we'll get to how the game played out, but it's almost as if the Jazz were in their own heads, and there was no reason for that because the Delta Center was rocking, and they were playing so well. Everything was against the Bulls. Pippen and Jordan hadn't been entwined at all in that series, and obviously Michael was sick in this instance, and you just wonder, they were so cheap with their turnovers. They were basically letting the Bulls back into the game repeatedly. And for someone, if you just told someone to watch this game without knowing who won, there was nothing to suggest that the Bulls were going to win this game. I'd love to know. I was trying to find out for exactly how long in the game they were leading because it seemed like the Jazz were in front throughout. And every time the Bulls reeled them in, they kind of recouped a little bit. And I just it calls to mind my favorite movie, lads, Catch Me If You Can. And Frank Abagnale Sr. says to Frank Abagnale Jr., do you know why the Yankees always win? And it's because the other team's too busy looking at their pinstripes. And you have to think that you're just playing against the Bulls, they're relentless. It's like that Manchester United reputational pressure in the 90s where you just know they have a reputation for coming back, and the Bulls, you just always had the sense that they were going to come back, and the Jazz knew that as much as anyone else did.
Yeah, I definitely go along with that. It's as well as that, I think the element of Michael Jordan being ill and coming up against an opponent that you think is ill almost just crystallizes the importance of the player and would almost get into your head a little bit more. It may not have been intended to be a mind game, but I think it certainly worked psychologically in his favor hugely that he was supposedly going into this game unbelievably under the weather. So I think it's interesting in that respect. When you look back at the context of this game, of course, it's the flu game. Michael Jordan being under the weather is the single most important thing to this. But there is a couple of other strands. We'll get to the Jazz in a moment because I think they're one of the more fascinating teams of that era. But before that, just one other Chicago player we should talk about at this point is Dennis Rodman. Now, first of all, he's hearing it big time from the Utah crowd throughout the game. Anybody who watches the game back will hear a lot of jeering every time he's on the ball. So Rodman is after making a few unwise comments in the build-up to this game. He was fined a record 50 grand during these finals for derogatory comments made about Mormons during the NBA finals. So I'm just reading from an Associated Press article from 1997. The fine, which followed Rodman's apology, was the largest in the history of the NBA and the third time the league had come down on Rodman in that particular season. So David Stern came out and he was like, I've indicated in previous actions that insensitive or derogatory comments involving race or other classifications are unacceptable in the NBA. In January of that season, Rodman was fined $25,000 and suspended for 11 games for kicking a courtside photographer. 2 months later, he was then fined another $7.5 grand for striking Joe Wolf of the Bucks in the groin. And then when it came to game 3, it was before game 3. It was after game 3, I should say, at Salt Lake City. He explained his poor play by saying, it's difficult to get in sync because of all the effing Mormons out there, and you can quote me on that. And he essentially repeats these comments when asked about the subject later and refuses to apologize until the following week when a penalty was pending, and he says, that was bad action on my part. So we retract that. He insisted that he didn't mean to insult an entire religion, say Associated Press. The people were giving me the finger and things like that. So you have this whole other element playing out where Michael Jordan is obviously the reason why we're watching this, but everybody hates Dennis Rodman. And I think as our move here, looking back on it, we can kind of laugh on it. It is, innocently naive from Dennis Rodman. I know he didn't have a great record that season, but that's all it was. And it just creates this unbelievable cauldron in the Delta Arena that night.
Yeah, Rodman wouldn't be the wisest when it came to stuff like that, and where he was in his personal life at that time. Anything that he said was really taken with a pinch of salt, because he could have said that to a reporter coming out of a casino in Vegas the night before the game. So he was an enigma, so much so that himself, Pippen and Jordan never talked outside of the 4 lines. They never talked in team meetings. They never went into anything as such. They were there to play basketball. They never talked outside of basketball. All their talking, was kind of done just in the lines. Anything outside of that, trainings, meetings, just general hanging out with your teammates. Just Rodman was a different type of cat at that stage, and he was kind of finding himself. And this is a guy, you don't remember that, 7 years before this was inside in the Pistons with no tattoos, no dyed hair, a real retreat kind of guy. He got Defensive Player of the Year. He started crying uncontrollably, couldn't even get out his speech for being the best Defensive Player of the Year. A guy that wasn't highly touted out of college or high school. And he did it, and he was my favorite player, bar Jordan, even above Pippen or any of the rest of them. Any of his teammates really in Jordan's 6 championships. Rodman was the guy who I loved to watch because of the energy, the hustle, the way he'd throw his body on the line for any loose ball. And Jordan wouldn't have put up with the shit that Rodman was dealing with the drinking and the partying and the drugs at night time. He would never have put up with that, but he had massive respect for Rodman on the floor because he played against him. And he realized, this fella's going to get his 6 or 7 points, or his 5 points, or his 2 points, but he's going to grab me 20 boards. And I need 20 boards, because if you look at the centers they never had dominating centers. Whether it was Brian Williams, Luke Longley, Bill Wennington before that, or Cartwright and Livingston, all these guys, he never had power forwards were his thing. He had Horace Grant, who was better offensively than Rodman, that wouldn't have been as good as a defensive player or a rebounder as Rodman. And you can see when Jordan gets the ball in these games, he really is score first. If you look at LeBron and these guys now, they kind of weigh it up and what are they? But Jordan, when he got the ball in these games, put his head down and said, it's my job to score for this team, and I'm going to find a way, no matter what, whether I'm sick or indifferent, I'm going to find a way to score.
It's really interesting. That is the contradiction of Dennis Rodman, because he's framed even now and retrospectively as this egocentric character, and yet on the court he's so selfless. He's very much team first. And the other thing, which should probably be borne out in this documentary, that he's pegged as a fundamental character in the whole Bulls story, but he joined them really quite late, as Kieran alluded to there. I think he was 34 when he joined the Bulls. He was 36 in this game. So as was alluded to a lot during the commentary, this team there was a lot of friction, and it was kind of coming apart at the seams. So you could kind of tell that this was the beginning of the end. And yet, like, they came through this game, showed a real team ethic to win this game, and obviously went on to close out the series.
There was also another element to Rodman on this particular week, and this was, you mentioned it, Kieran, Las Vegas. Las Vegas was almost his second home when they were playing in Salt Lake City. Now, Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins was on the Joe Rogan podcast a short time ago, and he had this to say.
So I'm hanging out with the Bulls. It's the first time they're playing Utah. It's the series the Bulls probably should have lost, but they didn't. It's the famous game where the famous series where Michael had the flu and scored 36 points. I don't know if you know that game. It's like one of the most famous games. Michael legit had crazy flu and scored 36, and they won the game, and they won the series. So in between one of those games, Dennis knows some billionaire. There's a day off. We get on the billionaire's plane and we fly to Vegas. We stay out all night gambling. And this is Dennis, like, you know, rubbing dice on people's bodies and throwing the dice so drunk they're bouncing out of the, you know, the craps pit. And I mean, just total mess. And you're thinking, how is this going to help us win a championship? Very much a fan mentality. I'm thinking, you know, naively, I'm going to kind of rein him in. So we stay out all night. We get up, we never go to bed. We fly on the private plane back to make the morning press shoot around back in Utah. So we've only been in Vegas for like 8 hours. So 9 a.m. I'm sitting in the stands. I haven't slept at all. They do the shoot around, and Dennis walks up and says, "Let's go back." Go back where? The hotel? No, let's go back to Vegas. So after the morning shoot around, drove to the airport to fly commercial because now the billionaire's not flying him back again, and gets on a plane commercial and is giving me shit because I don't want to go back to Vegas with him.
Jesus Christ.
On the off day. And this is during the NBA Finals. So through some sort of weird, you know, how the world works, I end up somewhere. I go to play miniature golf or something in Park City, Utah, where the Bulls were staying. And Phil Jackson and his family had just happened to be there on like an off day. And Phil's given me the look of death because I'm the one responsible for Dennis going to Vegas.
The rock star dragged him to party, and
I'm
you
the bad
ruined
guy.
it. Oh, that's hilarious.
And I'm thinking, you don't understand. I'm the one to tell him not to go.
So that's from the Joe Rogan podcast I think that was within the last year or so. Like, I think David Brady tells a story whenever he's on the show talking about not being part of the Mayo team and going to Coppers the night before in All-Ireland, which is fine because he's not part of the team. But as you say, Michael Jordan is depending on this guy to catch all his boards, and he's in Las Vegas and he goes twice in between games. Like, this is 1997. This is not some sort of Wild West kind of semi-professional league. This is millions of dollars on the line, playing against one of the most competitive beings that sport has ever seen, and he's just jetting off to Las Vegas. Like, it's incredible that it's incredible that Michael Jordan even had the patience to I don't know, keep this guy around or not allow the relationship to sour beyond the point where they tolerated each other, as you say, Kieran, that they were actually as okay as you can possibly be, given Rodman's tendencies to party a little bit.
It's mad. Like, it's bonkers. Like, it's just it shows you the time lapse of what's going on now versus what was going on then, that a fellow was able to do that and get away with it. The Bulls have been dealing with Rodman for 2 years at this stage. They know what he's like, and they really do. They leave him to his ways as long as he's getting 20 boards and 4 pints a night and getting inside the head of every power forward in the league. And he was called the Worm, was his nickname. And yeah, he had a way of getting in there and infiltrating with a bit of trash talk, with a bit of skullduggery, that kind of anything to win. He was, no wonder they hated him in Utah. And they hated him in Utah before he ever said anything about the Mormons. Don't worry. They would have hated I'm sure they would have hated the look of a guy like Dennis Rodman without Dennis Rodman having to say anything. But once he did say it, you're right, it did create that cauldron of effect. But yeah, just a sign of the times that a guy was able to go to Vegas after a morning shoot around to go drink and go party and gamble, and then come back the following day on game day You know, like what meetings were going on? Was there player meetings? Was there team meetings? You know, if you go away for an All-Ireland weekend, like the backs are meeting and the forwards are meeting and you kick around and you've this meal. Jesus Christ, I know you don't have time to go to Vegas anyway, that's one thing for sure, if you were getting ready for an All-Ireland final. But Rodman found a way, and look, as long as Dennis came and delivered what he was supposed to deliver, Jordan and Cole and Phil Jackson overlooked at everything. And that's in most teams. Like, people that think these harmonious teams and everybody loves each other is great, there's always a bit where one fella is doing something that people aren't overly happy for, but if he's doing it and delivering on the promise, that's good enough.
Yeah, I think so. Like, we do have a series of things we get through in every game here. We haven't even started to talk about the game itself, and I'm not done with the context just yet, because I think this game, it's a clearly obvious fact that this game is not just about the Bulls. It's not just about Michael Jordan and his flu. This is an unbelievable spectacle because of what Utah Jazz are bringing at this point. Like, in terms of where this team is in your heart, Kieran, this Utah Jazz team, I presume they have a fairly special place, even though you're a Bulls and a Michael Jordan fan, because they're sensational. They're brilliant. They go right up there immediately when you think about the teams that haven't got that championship ring.
Yeah, look, they do, and they were a great team. They had a great coach. Jerry Sloan is a great coach, even though, you know, he was probably outcoached by Jackson in both those series at times. But he was really good. And I think the legacy of the Jazz team is in a way the legacy of Stockton and Malone. Like, Stockton is 4,000 more assists than anybody else has ever had in the NBA. He's the most economical passer that the game has ever seen. He obviously had a guy in Malone who was second all-time scoring, so he had a guy who could put the ball in basket. And Malone was an absolute stud of a player. So yeah, their legacy is kind of, you know, if they'd have got this one, or even if they'd have got the one the year after, they would have it would have cemented their legacy, that when they're mentioned, you'd say, oh yeah, they were two brilliant players. They were top assists and second in points, and they won a championship. Whereas what often has now is they're almost kind of separated, and kind of, you know, Malone was the great scorer, Stockton was the great passer. But the thing that always rings true in all of this is they couldn't get them over the line.
Yeah. What's your reflection on this Jazz team, Ronan? Like, it's very easy to break it down to two men, but in fairness, like, if you were to compile a top 30 all-time player, they both make the list, I would say. Like, I presume Malone would probably sneak into the top 15. Stockton might even sneak into the top 20, but I would say certainly top 30 all-time NBA players, they're in the conversation. Like, that's quite something to say about two players who don't have NBA championship rings.
Yeah, and Karl Malone, like, as frustrating as he was in this game, and we can probably get to it, like, talk about a game of two halves, it was crazy, but like, he's second only to Kareem in terms of all-time scoring. Only LeBron James is a more first-team All-Pro, so that's the kind of context we're talking about this man in. And if he had performed in the first half, or the second half of this game as he did in the first half, you're talking about one of the all-time great finals performances. But for whatever reason, I don't know if that, in Kieran's opinion, is that what separates the great players from the elite players? Because Michael Jordan was always renowned as a closer, and it's all well and good, and it's also very important to be productive in the opening parts of games, but it really all comes down to the fourth quarter, and Jordan was almost never found wanting, and this is a very clear example of his direct competitor kind of crumbling a little bit.
Absolutely. I think we've set the stage nicely. That is the context of the flu game in 97. A cool 30 minutes there to sum up all the factors going into this. Let's get stuck into the game. And I think there's only one man who can actually sum this up better than either of us will in terms of reminding you of the moment of this game. Ronan has mentioned him. It's Stuart Scott of ESPN. And Ronan, I've seen you post this piece on social media before this week. It is fantastic. It's phenomenal. I'm only going to play a section of it, but go on to Ronan's Twitter to listen back to the full part. It's poetry in motion here. It's on SportsCenter, I think, isn't it, that night after the conclusion of this game. So here's what happened in the flu game.
Mike had 17 in the second quarter. Then vintage Jordan, the misdemeanor steal, one of 3 steals he had. Sick dribbling behind his back to Pippen. Pippen, no, Michael. Oh, yeah. Jordan had 7 rebounds, 21 in the first half. Seconds up in the second quarter, Brian Russell out-rocked the party that rocks your body. He had 11 points. He also had 3 threes. Jazz go in the locker room up 4. Third quarter, great Jazz movement. Malone to Antoine Carr, backdoor to Stockton. Carr had 6 assists. Michael in the third quarter, an ice pack, only 5 total points in the 3 third quarters in Utah. But in the fourth, Jazz up 3. Jordan Trey, money. He came in shooting only 17% from three-land in the playoffs. Game tied at 77. After the whistle, Jordan on the bench looking absolutely ill, and I'm not talking ill as in good. Minutes later, though, Jordan tells Russell, hey, yo, it's Michael, not Michelle. He had 15 in the fourth. Jazz not done. Loose ball scramble. Stockton from almost the same spot he hit the three in game 4 hits another one. He had 13. Jazz by 3. Late fourth, Utah up 1. Malone air balls to Jay. He was just 7 of 17 shooting. Jazz would have been up 3. Michael trying to hit the second free throw, does not. But Jordan, sick and everything, fights for the rebound. Out to Pippen. Pip to Mike. Michael, can't you see? Sometimes your threes just hypnotize me. Despite being sick and not being able to walk, Mike had 38 points. 17 seconds left. They got the dunk. Still, though, not enough. Karl Malone with 5 fouls. Cannot foul Pippen. Pippen ahead. Nice touch pass, Kukoc to Luke Longley. Bulls up 3. Utah down 3. Michael not even beginning to walk. No on the 3. Stockton with the ball. Scotty, very intelligent foul. Stockton shooting 85% from the free throw line in the playoffs. Misses it. Misses the first, effectively ending the game. Michael could barely put his arms up in the air. Unbelievable game by Michael Jordan.
Right. Beautifully summed up there. Moment of the match, lads. Like that Stockton free throw that he mentions there has to be one of the first things that comes to mind.
I think the moment of the match, there's a couple, like the pump fake shot to tie it at 77 apiece, where he kind of loans the ball to Pippen, Jordan gets it back and sinks this unbelievable three-pointer. And it kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier, where the Bulls were never quite out of it, and they always kind of kept within arm's reach of the Jazz, even though the Jazz were clearly the more formed team coming into this. And then obviously I think the closing image of this whole game is what will stick out in people's heads, is basically Jordan sinking the game-winning shot and then basically being carried off the court by Scottie Pippen. And it kind of speaks like Pippen carrying Jordan having carried him for about a decade. It was such a nice dynamic, and I think that's probably the moment that will stick out in people's heads if they get a chance to watch this back.
Yeah, probably is. Kieran, what are you going for here?
I kind of think the turnaround, like this was one the Jazz needed to win. They're at home. Jordan's down. He's injured. He's sick. You know, they got to get this one at home. Like, people don't often underestimate the power of home field advantage in GEA. But how important it is when you're playing in a Killarney if you're Kerry, or a Croke Park if you're Dublin, or a Páirc Uí Chaoimh, or a Simple if you're Tipperary. You know the place a bit better. You're more familiar with the surroundings. You've got the crowd really behind you that will drive you for that extra percentage and make it harder when you're trying to play against it. And I think this is a prime example. These, they were up 14 at the end of the first quarter, and they let the Bulls come out and score 34 in the second quarter. Like, you can't do that. You have your foot in their throat. Their main guy is struggling. He's sick. He doesn't have any energy. You got to really figure out a way to. The only guy that was going to get them going was Jordan. He was the only. He was the guy that you couldn't. And I don't think they double teamed him enough. And I don't think they went down on him. Like, every time he got the ball in the post, they waited till he put the ball in the floor before they doubled. When he got the ball in the post, they should have been doubling straight away and throwing it back out to Ron Harper or somebody else to try and beat you. But they left guys like Shannon Anderson, Jeff Hornacek, who's 6'4", who just can't mark Jordan. They left him mark him until Jordan beat him off the dribble, and then the help came towards the basket. So that first and second quarter turnaround from where the Jazz are so much up, and then that's wiped out by halftime. I'm sure at halftime there would have been kind of doubts on that.
So you would have question marks about Utah's defense, particularly in the third and fourth quarters.
I would, and it was a team, and I think it was a stubbornness thing out of Jerry Sloan, is that he was just a bit like, look, when maybe he thought that Jordan, maybe he read into too much that Jordan was sick, and they had to kind of that he was struggling so much, and that's why they gave him so much leeway. But a guy like Michael, with the fadeaway game he has, with his pull-up mid-range game, he's playing the triangle offense that's beautifully designed by Phil Jackson and Tex Winter, his assistant. But Tex used to get away to get Jordan the ball in his favoured position, which was his back to the basket, which he could turn and fade away towards the middle, or indeed the pattern that won the fadeaway towards the baseline. And if he gets that ball and you don't have a second guy running at him straight away, you're pretty much dead with Jordan in the mid-range games, certainly. And there's no doubt, like people say to me, oh, Jordan didn't shoot any threes and he didn't have assists and he didn't have many rebounds. If Jordan was playing today, he'd be as good as a 3-point shooter. Not like Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, but he'd be as good as a 3-point shooter as most, and he would take more. And when he had to take him, he was well able to score them. But in that day and age, like pulling up in a fast break for 3 was still probably a bit sacrilege. So the game was totally different. But that was a huge turning point. But yeah, I would have a slight a grievance to. And I'm sure looking back now, Jerry Sloan, if he had his time again, would say, okay, I'm going to fire as many bodies at Jordan all game long, especially when he's sick, and just not let him get up anything and make the Luke Longleys, the Kukocs, the Rodmans, the Pippins, the Kerrs carry them, or the Ron Harpers carry them. And unfortunately, when Jordan was absolutely dying, Jerry Sloan allowed him to have 38.
Yeah, like I'd be interested to get your take as well on how it was on the opposite side of the ball, because you look at Stockton getting double teamed quite a bit in the fourth quarter. You look at Karl Malone shooting 2 air balls.
Yeah, every time Malone got it late on, and the year after too, and there was obviously something Phil Jackson, because on Jordan's last game, the exact same thing unfolded where they were going down the stretch, and Jordan was scoring. He had 14 in the last quarter of his final ever game, and every time Malone got it in the post, they swarmed him. Pippen took him off him once. They really did. And Stockton on the pick and roll, they trapped him. But for some reason, the Jazz left these guys try and go man to man with Jordan. And that when Jordan beats you, then we'll send the help. But the help was too late. You'd Antoine Carr and you'd Karl Malone and Greg Ostertag and fellas like this coming at Jordan when Jordan's got a head of steam up going to the basket. And no matter what flu or no matter how sick he is, he's so crafty in the air and with his shot selection and making shots and drawing fouls. And he is the GOAT at this stage, still remember. So the refs are always going to give him a bit more leeway. All the other players would always say that when they played against the Magic or the Larry Bird or the LeBron James. When you're playing against these guys, the refs give him more calls. And Jordan always got his free throws when he drove to the basket. And he got 2 many free throws in both of these games. Yeah,
like, well, it wasn't at the start of game 4, as it didn't allow Jordan to the line at all.
Yeah.
Like, that's incredible. That's an absolutely astonishing statistic. Like, I'll hold my hands up and say I haven't watched that game, but the first thing I want to do after watching this is almost go back to that one rather than move on to game 6 to watch, because that just seems like an unbelievable effort from Utah on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and that was at home. That was in Chicago too, so they were getting hometown. Or was it in the Chicago?
The one before that would have been Utah, I think, because it would have gone 2-3-3.
Was it game 3? Yeah, okay.
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 Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like, but you're right though. Like, even in that arena, lads, of Delta going crazy, to still be getting what it feels like Bulls' favored decisions at times, because I think that was definitely the case. Just shows the power of Jordan, even in the eyes of the referees, away from home.
Yeah, just a quick side point on that, Owen, that like I was always of the opinion that the Super Bowl idea is probably better where it's just a one-off game and it's in a neutral venue and both sets of fans are there. But then you watch these unbelievable series and you see the dynamic where the home court advantage, like the noise, I don't think I've ever heard anything like it in a neutral venue. And can you imagine, like speaking to 2 Kerry men, can you imagine if it was Dublin Kerry best of 7 and you took game 7 down to Killarney? Can you imagine what the atmosphere would be like for that? Like, so I just think it's something worth thinking about. I was always of the opposite opinion, but this kind of crystallized things a bit in my mind. And then on Kieran's point, just about the double teaming, like I think Sloan was asked about that in the press conference after this game, that should you not have come up with a game plan maybe to neutralize Jordan with those jumpers, and he was like, oh, we look at it for game 6. And you'll see in game 6, which is obviously very famous in its own right, when Jordan gets double teamed, I think Stockton comes across, Brian Russell is on Jordan, and then Stockton comes across to try and double team, and he offloads it to Steve Kerr, and Kerr nails the shot that wins the series. And you just know, whatever way you want to play Jordan, he's going to find a way to beat you, and that was a classic example. And Steve Kerr, it's actually very funny, I think he was speaking to Scottie Pippen and Rachel Nichols on ESPN, and he's basically talking about that was not a planned move. In the timeout, Jordan basically said, just be ready, because I know they're going to come for me here. And the rest is history. It was a great shot from Steve Kerr.
But let's just talk about Steve Kerr in Game 5 here for a moment, because Oh, like passing ball off a teammate's back, can't get him in an arse's roar of landing a 3-pointer, despite the fact that he's coach of one of the greatest shooting teams of all
Yeah.
time. I just find Steve Kerr actually quite funny to watch in this game. It's like I don't know, he hasn't aged one bit. It's like you're taking a 55-year-old man's head and putting it on a 30-something-year-old man's body. It's brilliant. Like we'll get into that a bit more in trending and jarring in just a moment. But just to finish up on moments of the game, lads, I think it is kind of hard to argue against Ronan's point there that just this entire fourth quarter is the moment of the game. And I think if you have to crystallize it down to one screenshot, it's Jordan with his head down on the bench with Pippen beside him. That is the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It has to be. Right, let's move on. Up next in our set of categories, which we always stick very closely to. Oh, sorry, Secret MVP. Before we get into trending and most jarring, Secret MVP, who flew under the radar and who has a pretty good game that's not called Michael Jordan, I think, in this case. I think that's what we've got to be looking for because I think he's probably the individual MVP for this game. Who are you going for, Ronan, on this one? We'll start with you.
Ostertag was unbelievable in this game. Unbelievable.
Yes.
It's like, I think it was only his second season in the league, and he basically stood up when the rest of the team in spots were found wanting. He was the consistent player, getting boards on both sides of the court. Just an unbelievable contribution. And in a winning team, I think he would have been talked about an awful lot more. But just a selfless performance. And I think to Kieran's point about Rodman, the kind of player that Stockton and Malone would have been thinking, thank God we have this guy to do the quote-unquote dirty work for us, because he kind of let them play, and it just made for a great spectacle.
15 rebounds Greg Ostertag had on that particular occasion, and 13 points to match as well. And after Karl Malone, he was the highest scorer for Jazz on tonight. Nobody managed to get close to 15 boards for Bulls on the night. He was pretty good, Kieran.
Yeah, he was. He's like Pippen, was always the 1-2 punch. And in this series, he went from 27 to 14 to 27. And I think he had 17 or something, or 18 in this game as well. But he'd 7 threes the day before. And he was a guy that was, by himself, he was a great player, but he obviously flew under Jordan's wing for his career. But Jordan knew how important he was to him. And, he had 17. He had a double as well, 17 and 10. So that's pretty solid from your wingman. When you're struggling a bit. But yeah, Ostertag was a beast, and he's a mountain of a man. He's 7'2", and he's all there. And he was a country boy, and Malone's a country boy, and the two of them, they had no fear. And this was at a time, don't forget, this isn't the fairy NBA that we're playing in today. There was fellas going to the basket even in this series, and you could tell that they were leaving something on, guys. Yeah. It wasn't quite the Celtics and Lakers from the 80s where you could decapitate someone when they were going to the basket and kind of put your hand up and say sorry. This wasn't that bad, but Ostertag and Malone down there were like 2 brick walls, and he was really good too. And but yeah, I thought Pippen with 10 and 17 was a good shout for your under the radar guy. And I know he shouldn't go under the radar because he's Pippen, but you said anybody bar Jordan, so I'm going to say Pippen.
Yeah, no, I'd probably lean more towards Ostertag myself, but I did want to make this point about Pippen. I think, like you listed statistics there, I was going to say that perhaps it wasn't Pippen's greatest game in a Bulls shirt. The statistics speak for itself that he was absolutely excellent on this night. But I wonder if his importance is just highlighted by the fact that perhaps Jazz were missing that exact sort of player. That if they had a great wing player during that era, that they might have actually got over the line. And I know that's me being very much, the Utah Jazz is all about Stockton and Malone, and that's where it ends. You don't get to an NBA Finals unless you've got a deep squad that is truly brilliant. And they had fully winning seasons forever during that decade, I think it's fair to say. But I just feel
it was probably Malone's 19 that cost him in this game. Really,
well, yeah, there's that as well.
You look at the spread across their numbers. Russell had 11, Stockton had 13, Greg Ostertag had 13, Malone 19, Jeff Hornacek 7. Hornacek gets up to 12, which I think he averaged around 12 or 13. That's if he gets up to that, and Malone has his usual 32 or 34 points. The Jazz win comfortably, but as you said, it was an enigma in that game how good he was early on, and how poor he finished in a must-win game. Let's face it, you're at home. We've said it already. You're at home. You're against the wounded. The leader of the other group is wounded. That had to be the time Malone said, "Okay, I'm going to take us over the line in this game." And 19 points for a guy who gets, and the amount of ball and the positions that he gets, great passes from Stockton. you know, he had to have more, and you just didn't get enough shots up, like, you know, for a guy like him, 17 shots. You know, a guy like him these days is probably shooting, you know, 22 shots to get their big numbers and up around the 30, 35 points mark. But he was probably a slight disappointment on the day in a game where he just needed to be flawless. And you see, when your leader is flawless, I don't think the Jazz would have been in the position that they were in. I think if the leader is showing the way, I think everybody else follows and it goes over. But if your leader is looking a bit like, you're looking at the two leaders here, one is dying sick and he's 38 points, and the other fella is in the shape of his life, in the prime of his life, to try and win his first championship, and he gets 19 in a crucial game 5. Probably a lot of where the series turned that year.
100%. That's it. That's the winning and losing of the whole series. I would like, when you say their leader is in unbelievable shape, I've fully decided that Karl Malone is probably the human being I least want to get into a fight with ever. Like, he is the scariest man in the world.
Yeah, and he's supposed to be a big gentle giant, like, but he is he's an absolute tank. They all say it. Barkley, all of them, when they hopped into Malone, every one of them knew it, and that he wouldn't be. He always kind of, he'd an inner strength about him, and an inner determination about him, that he never got too flustered. You know, Rodman is probably the only fella that probably I saw Malone absolutely snapping with in games, and Rodman did it in both series, 97 and 98.
And of course, they did it at WWE's Bash at the Beach in 1998. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, Kieran. Pay-per-view in 98, you had Karl Malone and Diamond Dallas Page going up against Dennis Rodman and Hulk Hogan. I think Rodman and Hulk Hogan had won, and then Karl Malone comes back and like RKO's Rodman, Hogan, and the referee, and claims the victory.
I think I remember Rodman. That's when Hulk Hogan was a bad guy wearing black, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I didn't like that Hulk. I more like the WrestleMania tearing off the jersey Hogan.
Let's move on. Yeah, that's a pretty good version of him. Let's move on to trending / most jarring. We might just start with what was trending at the time, and I think you touched on something, Kieran, that I wanted to just bring up, and it's probably jarring as well, because it's just a trend of going to the board all the time. You watch an NBA game now, we all know about it. It's vastly different to back then. You're dead right. If Jordan is playing in today's NBA, he's a completely different player, probably still as dominant, definitely still as dominant.
He's getting 50 points a game.
He is.
50 points. With his mid-range, and you know he would have improved his 3, and you can't touch him when he's going to the basket. It's 50 points a game for Jordan in this day and age.
Absolutely. But, like, does it make for... I'm trying to think of the word here. Like, does it make for a more exciting prospect, say, in quarter 2, quarter 3, the 90s setup of basketball? Like, I definitely feel that the intensity is higher. I think that there's obviously a little more contact. There's obviously a bit more collisions under the boards. Whereas nowadays, you've just got a shootout quite often early doors, which I really enjoy. I think the skill on show is unbelievable, and it's never been at a level as it is right now. But this is a little bit different what we're seeing in the mid to late 90s.
No, I totally go along with that. I think that was the most jarring thing for me. Or maybe jarring isn't the right word in this instance, but it's definitely the most notable thing, where just the physicality and like the putting a premium on basically getting in the paint rather than shooting from 3. And like advanced analytics being what they are, people have decided that's the way to go. And you see what Houston are doing this year, which is totally fair enough. But to your point, like the dynamics, there's just so many more wrinkles to a game in this period than there are now, where now it's basically a shooting competition. Whereas there's just these mini battles going on all over the court. And you see with Steve Kerr and Stockton, just that little physical niggly battle that they were having. Both of them would have been thrown out in the first half if that was now. Like, just there would have been fouls called all over the place. So I just think the current NBA, as great as it is, and the athleticism is probably gone up a tier, it's probably lacking what was so on show in this game.
But what I will say on that, like, after watching it for first couple of quarters, what then jars with you is that Tony Kukoc comes on, and not just three pointers from 3 shots. It's like, that's Kristaps Porzingis right there. This is not something we should be seeing at any point in the 1990s. A big guy like knocking 3 down from the 3-point range, but we get it anyway. Like, the other thing I want to say, and we'll come to you, Kieran, for your jarring and trending moments from it. But Jeff Hornacek, like, I don't think I've watched too much of Jeff Hornacek play. Like, I associate him with a largely failed coaching career in recent times. And you just see him come onto the court with that neat comb over. Like, I'm not sure if you've seen the episode of the US Office where they play basketball. Like, he looks like he's popping down from Dunder Mifflin, going into the warehouse to play a game of basketball with the big athletes and stuff. But like, he's really impressive. He's really, like, he's decent, and he just looks totally out of place for 90s basketball.
He does on, and don't worry, he'd knock you out in 2 seconds with that comb over. Jeff Hornacek was a 6'4". Jeff Hornacek, if Jeff Hornacek landed into a European league, he'd be getting 25 points a game. Hornacek was a legit baller. Probably wouldn't survive as much in the NBA now as back then. And you know, a lot of people that like to go against me against Jordan always say that, oh, he'd harness Jordan had Hornacek on him for 2 series. Jordan had everybody on him. He'd Hornacek, he'd Shannon Anderson, he'd Byron Russell. They threw a good number of guys at him. But to touch back on your other guy, Kukoc, like, you know, you Drazen Petrovic, you Vlade Divac, the European takeover that we see nowadays, and it is because they're that high of a level. Kukoc was unbelievable, and you know, a man with the nicknames of the White Magic, the Spider from Split, the Pink Panther, the Waiter. The Croatian sensation is my favourite. But you know, he's a guy that you're going to expect is going to be able to step up and hit big shots. And yeah, he's a 7-footer out of Europe that people probably looked at, and I would say a lot of basketballers at the time would have been kind of wary of. But I tell you, when they finished their 48 minutes against Tony Kukoc, once he started becoming 6th man of the year, which was the year before the season, you know, he demanded a respect. He was European Player of the Year twice before he came. He played in Italy. He played in his own country in Croatia. He won, I think, 3 European Final Fours. So, you know, as well as his prowess on the international level with Olympics, etc., World Championships, etc., Kukoc was a huge snap up by the Bulls when they made that deal happen, and it was a huge part to play in various stages of various games. And you're right, he was pretty quiet outside of this little spurt. But again, these little spurts are worth their weight in gold when you're on the road trying to win a game. They give you confidence. And when the guys are out there watching a 7-footer with left hand, who was bringing Malone, he was causing Malone hassle, and Antoine Carr, because he was bringing them out to places that they never wanted to be. If you're 6'10" or 6'11", and you're over 20 stone, and you're marking a guy like Kukoc out in the perimeter that has the pull-up jump shot, that can shoot the 3, or that can take you left-handed to the basket, and he's 7 foot, so when he's moving and he's going extending for a layup, you can't block him once he gets level or by you. So he was a real problem, and a huge part of this Bulls dynasty. And yeah, you're right, his 3 threes were a huge part of it. And yeah, even the gear trending,
amazing.
The gear is a bit baggier. It's a bit longer. It's
but it's class, isn't it?
Yeah, it's class. Yeah, well, that's the way they were worn. Like, it was coming. So you had the 80s where the shorts were like jocks.
Yeah.
And then this was kind of mid 90s. Everybody was kind of down around the kneecaps. And then into the early 2000s, they went below the kneecaps. They were like tents. Fellas were like wearing size gear that was 10 times too big for them. And now it's gradually climbing all the way back to where guys are wearing jocks again, playing these tight shorts and these tight jerseys. So it's you don't know what's trending in what era, but yeah, the gear, that Bulls gear with Jordan, the baggy Jordan shorts, the baggy jersey, the
training tops,
and and the tongue out is kind of will always go on history with this time period, I would say.
And just the Utah logo, like once they go to the Mountains logo, it's beautiful, and so much of that gear is just class at our vantage point. I think 25 years is almost the sweet point of nostalgia, and I think that's almost the reason why gear is going back that way, because people actually just want to look like they were playing in the Michael Jordan era. And so it's all brilliant. Anybody who's going back to look at it, it'll all just look stunning. And even the old style television broadcasting, the lower thirds, the statistics, it looks like you're playing NBA 2000, and it just feels perfect. I think in terms of all the editions we've done of Classic Game Club, I think this has actually been the most perfectly nostalgic one. And I think half of it is because you're watching Michael Jordan play basketball, and half of it is because you're watching great American broadcasters with fairly rudimentary but nice looking graphics, and everybody's wearing cool 90s clothes. It's perfect. All it was missing was just like a good 90s celebrity. That's the one thing we didn't have side court. I guess Utah compared to like Staples Center. Yeah, exactly. It's not exactly.
I don't think there's too many of them living out in Utah, to be honest with you.
Rodman should have picked up a couple in Vegas and brought them with him.
Yeah.
Right. Finally, we want to get into the context, the legacy of this game as we wrap up. Just before we do that, let's have a listen to the man himself. Michael Jordan was interviewed on court at the end of Game 5 in '97.
Michael, one of the great performances, the way you were feeling, you played 44 minutes. It was all about will.
Yeah, it's all about desire. You just got to come out here and do what you got to do. We wanted it real bad, and me as a leader, I had to come out and do my best, and hopefully the team could rally around me and come out and make contributions.
Never any doubt down the stretch. How weak were you?
I was really tired. I was very weak. At halftime, I told Phil that use me in spurts, but somehow I found the energy. Just stay strong. I wanted it really bad.
All right, congratulations on a great game, Michael. Get some rest,
Thanks.
And we'll see you on Friday. Let's go over to Jim Gray.
All right, thank you very much, Ahmad. Scotty, what can you say about your teammate, Michael Jordan? You've seen this guy do everything. Have you ever seen him play under these kind of conditions and this illness?
No, I haven't. It was a hell of an effort for him, just to be able to come out and play in this game. And the effort that he gave us today was unbelievable. As his teammates, we should have stepped up and played much better basketball. But we really appreciate the way that he steps up and shows his leadership to our ball club.
What did he say to you guys? It looked as though at one point on the bench, like he nearly was exhausted and couldn't continue.
Well, he pretty much was. He felt like he was going to faint. I guess he was pretty dehydrated and just tired. But, he gutted it out. And, we owe this win to him, man. He did everything that he could to carry us.
Yeah, Scottie Pippen there after Michael Jordan speaking at the end of that game, and just pure appreciation for Michael Jordan. The aftermath of this, just to go through what happened afterwards, pretty significant, to be fair, because of course Michael Jordan gets himself another ring. Game 6, Steve Kerr hits the winning shot, as Ronan mentioned. Jazz, I think, probably contributing to their own downfall a little bit in that game as well. 1998 then, Jazz have home court advantage and are actually way better rested. The Bulls have to come through a much tougher assignment in their conference finals. This is the shot by Michael Jordan. It's so good, it makes itself onto a piece of garment worn by Kieran Donaghy this very day. And then other things that happened in 1998, as I mentioned, Bash at the Beach, the real showdown between Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman. But you can't really put it in any more.
We should do that game too, man. That was an unbelievable game.
Yeah, and it's hard because we were having this conversation about the documentary, and obviously we'll talk about that in a sec. But what is the Michael Jordan moment? What is the one that we want to do? If we had to pick one classic game to go back and watch for this, it's either the one in your jumper, it's either the flu game. There are a whole slew of different ones that you could do. Ones with way more intrigue, where perhaps Jordan was off it, which is sometimes more interesting. But perhaps for
you could go do the one where he got 63 on 5 Hall of Famers when he was a rookie.
Yeah, that one. That one is probably up there as well. In your opinion, where is Jordan at? So we're talking about 97 now. We're talking about Game 5, 97, and Game 6. When he's got that ring on after that, where is he at in his career at this point?
I think he's where he wants to be. He's after repeating again for the second time. He's got 5 championships.
Is he close to his peak?
I think he's probably in his peak this is the thing with Jordan. This is what I try to explain to people. Jordan was gone for 2 years in his peak. They were his peak years. He was playing baseball. He'd come back and try and get. The only reason he came back, I think there was a rookie called Benjamin Watson that played with the Bulls? He was a rookie anyway, and he was talking the year Jordan was gone. He was talking shit inside the training session, saying he could beat Jordan one-on-one. And the news filtered 4 days later through to Jordan that there's this rookie that's pretty high-class rookie that says that he can beat you, And the following Monday morning, Jordan's inside in the hall, togged out, kind of going up and down with the Bulls boys. And then when the training's finished, he calls your man over and tells him, "Come out here. You were saying something there last week." And proceeded to embarrass him.
Corey Benjamin.
Everybody. Corey Benjamin. Yeah. So don't he was just a different gravy. He was you could never write him off. You could never say he was beaten. He was clutch. He was he do anything to win, and he says that himself, and that's what I love most about him. And that's why I think that's the only reason the whole dynamic worked with Rodman. A lot of fellas wouldn't have been able to make that dynamic work if they weren't in that frame of mind. But he was a win at all costs type of guy. He wanted guys in his team that would win at all costs. And the amount of moments he's had in the game, like whether it be the dunk contest against Dominique, the free throw line dunk contest, that game in that game against the Celtics in was it 85 or 86? 86 maybe. He got 63 in the Boston Garden. They all tried to mark him. He's going against the team that won the championship that year and won it relatively comfortably against the Houston Rockets. And they can't handle this guy. Like, you know, you go back to his college days and you see he's shot to beat Georgetown in front of 60,000 people in a college game. And plus, it was one of the most watched games around the world after the Bird Magic college game. It was the most watched college game, that North Carolina versus Georgetown. And here he is, not even the Jordan we know yet, but still taking the game-winning shot with 16 seconds to go out in the wing. So he's had an amount of. But I think this picture here is the one. I just think that's the moment where you kind of go, okay, he's not made of human material. He's made of something else, because you can't have the career you have and you want to go out on top and then you just go make it happen for yourself. He steals it down the stretch. He makes the layup, 40 seconds to go. He goes down the court. He knows this base-to-base screen that they were doing from 97 right through even into the 98 series, the same plays. It was either a high-low from Malone to get him into the block, or it was a base-to-base to get him into the block. And Jordan knew it was coming. He was on Hornacek. He walked across Hornacek screen Rodman. Malone came to the base and Jordan doubled back. And Malone got it and felt Rodman and never saw Jordan come from his weak side. And you notice in that play how aggressively Jordan goes at the ball. He's not too worried about taking it or trying to pull it off him. He just slaps it. Why? Because he knows he's got Rodman near him as well, and he knows how good of a defensive player Rodman. So I'd say Jordan said to himself, if I get my hands on this, one of us is going to come up with it. He comes up with it and walks down the court, and
three-peat.
Game over. Yeah, three-peat. And he always wanted the big shot. And if you look back at any of the games, when the game is on the line, he's never passing. He's never shirking responsibility. The only reason he's passing is if it's the right thing to do. But other than that, he's shooting. He's taking the responsibility and everything that goes with it.
And that doesn't happen, Kieran, without this in 97. How does it change if we slide those doors and Utah Jazz come away from 97 being NBA champions?
It changes. I think it changes the landscape an awful lot. I don't know. Would Jordan have reloaded and gone again? You know, or maybe he would have. Or how would that have affected? How would have the likes of maybe a Rodman going to Vegas the night before a big game, and if they lose, how does that affect the group afterwards? And can you look past that and just say, oh, we'll go again next year? Whereas when you win the league, the win covers over all the cracks, and you say, do you know what, we can go again. So I think for the Bulls, it was huge. It was just massive. And as I said earlier on, for the Jazz, you know, it would have. I hate saying the word consolidated, because Malone and John Stockton are both in the top 50 players of all time. They're both Hall of Famers, and they've unbelievable careers. But it's like Barkley, it's like Ewing. It's just said about them. They never got it done. They never got over the line. So if it was a sliding door scenario, I think those guys in particular would be kind of I don't know what the word is, but their careers would have been kind of justified, as in with winning a championship that year if they could have done it. And the year after wouldn't be as big as of a deal. But
there would be no buts about them. Like when you talk about Stockton and Malone, there's always the but. And that's the heartbreaking thing about being a professional basketball player at the top of your game in the era of Michael Jordan. If you existed in the era of LeBron James, you might get a sniff. If you existed in the era of Michael Jordan, unless he's playing baseball, you don't get a sniff of that ring. And for me, that's the difference between the two. But that is a rabbit hole we are not going to go down. Ronan, do you have any more takeaways before we wrap up?
No, just like in terms of underrated, overrated, and I think it can be underrated. I think people will probably know about the flu game, know what happened in it, but probably never went in as in depth as we have today. And it's just such an unbelievable game. And if anything else, just watch the closing sequence. It's hard to think of a more dramatic, almost scripted, where It's like Stockton hits a 3 from the exact spot where he hit the 3 in the previous game. Then Karl Malone like implodes, basically takes a shot with loads of time on the clock, and then doesn't foul at the end.
God, a terrible shot.
And
Jesus.
doesn't foul at the end, even though he knows
Yeah.
he's going to be fouled out. But you have to take one for the team in that situation.
You have to do the right keen in it and just take the foul and get out and hope some other guy can come in and make the shot down the other end.
Yeah, and then Jordan is given the free throws because of Malone's bad shot. Jordan goes up the court, misses the second one, and somehow he's the guy who comes out with the ball. It just shows like with 5% energy, basically, he was the one who fought and got the ball and recycled it back around to nail the shot to win it. And you're just like, all those moving elements in the space of a couple of minutes in real time. It's such an unbelievable sequence, and I think if nothing else, just look at that.
Correct, and it's sacrilege. It's sacrilege to allow. It's sacrilege to allow a guy that shoots the free throw to come out with the rebound. It's like it just should not happen in any scenario, especially when you've got guys 7 foot all around the basket. So like with all the talk about defenses and what way teams are playing, something as simple as if they had grabbed their own rebound right there could be the difference in winning or losing. And basketball is so funny that way because the game is so fast and there's so many decisions happening, and it's 94 feet and the score is 100 to 98 or 98 to 96 or whatever score in basketball games are. But what you do then when you look back over a football game last, you'll say, oh geez, we should have scored that point with 7 minutes to go, and we could have done this, and there might be two things. Whereas in a basketball game, you'll torment the life out of yourself. We should have done that, we should have done this, you should have got the help there, that was a loose ball, there was no way, that's a technical. There's so many little things to lead up that when you lose by a point, you kind of you've an encyclopedia of stuff to look back on to see where did it all go wrong. So look, it's an unbelievable game, and it can't be underrated. It can't be underrated because you've a guy that's practically dead scoring 38 points.
Well, that is a very good point. For sure, I think Michael Jordan's achievement on this occasion is probably perfectly rated. I think as a game, I think it's underrated. I think that you got to give Jazz a lot of credit for that. There is a future psychological piece in what you just said there, Kieran, about the difference between football losses and basketball losses, because you're right. Like, even just as a complete neutral with the space of 23 years looking back at it, I'm like, oh my God. Like, you're looking at it like you're watching a car crash unfold and multiple car crashes unfold, but actually that's just basketball. That is just the game when you're going up against Michael Jordan. It was truly enjoyable though watching that. I would highly recommend it at home if you're looking to watch a game. It'll get you in the mood for this Sunday, next Monday really, when it hits Irish screens. We're going to have Michael Jordan, The Last Dance, a 10-part series. Kieran and Ronan are going to join myself every week, probably Tuesdays on OTB AM. We're going to look back on it. I trust you're excited, lads. What's the one thing you want to see from this, Kieran, when it comes to new Jordan material?
I want to see behind the scenes stuff. I want to see team meetings. I want to see him talking because we get such an insight into all the guys now with social media. They give up their own insight, and there's just so much more cameras, and obviously the way the media has exploded over the last number of years, both social and print and TV. It's we didn't get to see much of behind the scenes. Well, we didn't in Ireland anyway. We didn't have Sports Centre. Whatever about getting the games, we definitely didn't have Sports Centre to be keeping an eye on certain things. We were getting videos sent across the water from some fellow we knew in America, and we'd watch them 4 games religiously. But that was the way it was done. Whereas I'm hoping this Last Dance just gives us kind of a real insight into, I want to learn more about Phil Jackson, because how he kept all these egos, and how he why didn't Phil stamp his foot down and say to Dennis, you're not going to Vegas. You're here to win a championship. You're getting paid to win a championship. You are not going. What would that have done? Would Rodman have thrown the ties out of the cot? Would he have exploded? Would he have gone out in Utah that night? Could he have got arrested? You don't know what way to look at it. And I'd love to see how Phil, he's got 11 championships as a coach. So he knows what he's about. He's got 2 as a player, I think. And I think he's gonna his way of handling all these guys, the egos, the fame, and he even says in the trailer, like, we were like a rock star band that people wanted to live up there. He said something along those lines, So he knew what he was coaching, and he knew the group he had, and he knew the demanding player he had in Jordan, and to try and build a team around that to get the best out of him. was huge. But just kind of the behind the scenes bits, I think, is what most people want to see. And even interviews, because, like, you know, these guys are pretty bulletproof. A lot of them have 6 rings in their pockets. You know, I think they'll be candid enough. I think it's long enough ago where they can really open up about it. You know, if The Last Dance came out in the year 2000, a lot of them might have still been playing. They wouldn't want to give up so much. It's 30 years ago. People should be able to say what happened, and the funny stories, the behind the scenes. Yeah, and I'd love, you know, as I said, look, Rodman and Jordan were my favourites, so I hope they feature well in it. And obviously Phil Jackson and Steve Kerr, as you said, is very funny. He's a very witty guy, and I think he'll be funny in it. But it's go on, yeah.
It's just like, I'm just really excited for it. Like, we just don't have much to look forward to at the moment. We don't have a lot to look forward to. Like, I was watching Horse last week, watching Paul Pierce go up against Zach Levine last weekend. Like, that's how desperate we are for content. And we've got possibly, we've certainly got one of the most fascinating figures who's subject of a 10-part documentary right now, and there's no other sport. I'm like a kid before Christmas right now. Like, it's perfect timing. Thank God that they are bringing this forward by a couple of months. Bring this out now. But as I said, there's going to be plenty of content on that over the next couple of weeks. Kieran, Ronan, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a million for joining me this afternoon. More from the Classic Game Club next week. Tweet @OffTheBall if you've got any shouts. Chat to you then. Bye-bye.